With the latest agriculture news from across the state and nation, it's time for the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. Here's your host, Sabrina Halvorson.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us this morning here on the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson here with Lorrie Boyer. Morning, Lorrie.
Good morning.
And Nick Papagni. Good morning, Nick.
Good morning.
All right. How are you guys doing on this Friday? I'm already stumbling all over myself.
Pretty much the same here, Nick.
So far, everything is good. The rain has stopped in California. It was last 2 days. It's been a lot of rain, but overall, it's a good day.
Good. That's good. Yeah, we were talking a little bit off mic yesterday, Nick, about that it can be a difficult time. Rain is always welcome especially in the Central Valley of California, but there are times when it's rough on the crops, and especially because you also got some hail and that during bloom, Nick, we were talking yesterday, that can be a real problem if it's knocking those blooms off the trees.
It did knock a lot of almond bloom off the trees. I was driving around and but overall, if it's going to rain, let's rain now. And then after May 1st or so, forget it. No more rain.
And the timing of rain for the crops out there, of course, it's different for each of the crops. Like a March rain can be really bad for some grape crops, but
Cherries, yeah.
it all depends on what you're growing and where you're at. Rain kind of hits differently. Again, because of the drought problems in California, we always say that rain is good, but rain at the wrong time of the year and on the wrong crops can really be damaging.
It really does. And you get in those September rains for raisins, they're laying out. It's not good either. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that can completely destroy the raisins when they're trying to dry out there if you get a rain. So
not good.
Yeah, it's a delicate system out there. It truly is, and especially because California grows so many different types of crops, and most of them they have different needs from each other. It can make it all really delicate.
Yeah, and the good news, we're getting a lot of snow up in the mountains, and that's great.
Yeah, because that's water for later use.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's it.
So there's a couple things going on today that we wanted to talk about, and I'm going to start out with talking about the Western Ag Processors Association. Just a note from them, they are actually rebranding, and they are rebranding as the Western Tree Nut Association. And so the WAPA, I call them, the Western Agricultural Processors Association, has been around for quite some time, and they do a lot of work within the tree nut industry. So they are effective immediately rebranding as the Western Tree Nut Association, and they are also bringing in growers, which previously growers had not necessarily been part of this association. So with the rebrand, they are bringing in growers as well. So they say it's to enhance advocacy for stakeholders involved in the tree nut industry, for all stakeholders, that now including growers, hullers, processors of almonds, pecans, pistachios, walnuts. So I just wanted to make a note of that so that our listeners would know, because we are pretty heavy listenership in tree nut areas, but that the association is expanding its wings and going through a bit of a rebrand. So that will now be the Western Tree Nut Association, formerly the Western Agricultural Processors Association. And then our other bit of news for today, we're talking about our main topic really is the USDA firings. And this is something that we've talked about on the show quite a bit because of the massive effect that it can have on a lot of our programs, and not just around California, but around the states. So I'm looking for the official name of the board. I know it's the MSPB. It's the Merit Systems Protection Board, has now issued an order requiring USDA to bring back fired workers to their jobs for at least the next 45 days while the board is looking into these firings. Again, that is nearly 5,700 USDA employees around the nation who were fired. They must get their jobs back, at least temporarily. Lorrie, what are you seeing on this?
And it's actually, and that's all correct. If I read it, it is the 5,700 probationary employees, meaning they were at work there 2 years or less. So one of those employees who worked for the Forest Service is actually the one that went to the Office of Special Counsel and filed this lawsuit. This is interesting to me because I have never heard of the Office of Special Counsel. I didn't know that's what it was called anyway. I knew there was a place where you could go if you're a federal worker and bring up things like this. But then the Merit Systems Protection Board, that's a new one to me as well. If folks don't really know about this, it's an independent agency and it's not a federal agency, in other words, and it protects federal employees from wrongful termination, retaliation, and political interference. So I learned a couple of things today on these other boards and resources for federal employees who get terminated. So as you mentioned, yeah, about 5,700 USDA employees could possibly get their jobs back here, at least temporarily. 45 days can go pretty quickly, so that'll at least give them a little bit of time to try to figure things out, and hopefully they'll figure it out within that 45-day time period. Otherwise, they'll extend it, as we know the government loves to do, is extend things. So there's that.
That is something the government excels at, right? Extending things. And so you mentioned the probationary employees, and that is employees who have been at their job for 2 years or less, but also it is people who got a promotion and then were on a probationary status. So they could have been at US, and some were at USDA for 20 years and then got a bump up in their position that puts them back on probation. Those people also fired. So that's a lot of institutional knowledge that was just released and eliminated. And a lot of people who have been working these programs for a very long time, who know how the programs work, who know how to make them work efficiently. When you've been in your job for so long, you have an idea of how to make these things work. And so those are also people who were on these probationary status because they got promotions. And they will now get their jobs back again for at least the 45 days while this is investigated. So we are talking about the USDA and the employee firings. There has been an order from the MSPB, which is the Merit Systems Protection Board, that is bringing back the nearly 5,700 USDA employees who were fired.
Now, when they got the letter, the pink slip, as Secretary Rollins calls it, USDA Secretary of Agriculture Brooke Rollins referred to it as the pink slip, well, at Commodity Classic. And while this information had not come out before she spoke, and it is in this article that we're reading here, or taking information from, from DTN, as I mentioned yesterday, she is taking responsibility for the accidental firings of the researchers and those working on the bird flu. And there is a quote in here saying that. But these other people, if you will, are a little bit new here in addition to that. And I'm glad that you pointed out that, Sabrina, that there is the probationary people that are included, and then the people who got a bump up, got a promotion, and they're also affected. So in their pink slip, if you will, the email said that it was going to let go of people not even based on performance, but due to a restructuring of the USDA, or restructuring, in this case, of the U.S. Forest Service. I don't know. To me, that's just important. I'm not sure where it gets you or doesn't get you at this point in time, or what kind of point that might be. But to me, that's an important thing to have, because if you're one of these employees and you're seeking other employment, you want to be able to tell people what happened in an honest fashion. And so you get this email from the government, at least you have that, pointing out that it was no fault of your own. It wasn't based on your performance or anything you did wrong. It was actually a restructuring of the government. And then one other thing I want to say, and Sabrina and we've talked about this, and Nick, I'd like to get your opinion. If you are one of these workers that were let go, would you go back?
I think so. I think they'd go back if they had an opportunity. Do they have a choice? I'm sure they go put their resume in and go for it somewhere else, but it's happening in my neck of the woods as well. We have a research center in Parlier, California, that they're shutting down, and they work on varieties, different new varieties, different from apricots to table grapes. It's infecting every little city, probably in the United States. I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know. You'd have to add. That'd be a good interview.
It would. A lot of them can't speak on it, especially if they do want their jobs back. They can't to do interviews. But yeah, I would love to be able to talk with a few of them. And I have seen some people who are speaking about it, just the uncertainty that it causes. And you bring up a great point, Lorrie, that making that difference in why they were let go. stating, because originally it was stated it was for performance reasons, and that makes it really hard for a person to get another job. And it's wrong. It was not for performance reasons. It was a restructuring. And I think we all understand restructuring. Businesses go through restructuring, government goes through restructuring. You have to be flexible enough to restructure things now and again to make sure that they're working. That wording, as we all know, words, us being radio people and journalists and things like that, we know that words make a difference, and words, you have to be very exact in your words. So yeah, when you get your pink slip, you want it to be exactly why. And if it's saying that you're doing a bad job when that's not the case at all, that can be really a big problem. And not only for the employee, but can you imagine in the private sector, if you were let go and it was for performance reasons where there had been no performance problems, that opens the business up to a lawsuit. And we're seeing the same problem with the federal government, that incorrect wording is opening the federal government up to a lot of lawsuits, and rightfully so. People have a right to protect themselves and the right to be able to get jobs when they've been let go, and to have the actual reasons for their dismissal portrayed accurately. Those words matter.
That is a really good point about opening yourself up to more lawsuits. Here's another question I have, and I don't know if you, either one of you, know the answers to it, but the Merit Systems Protection Board issued the stay. They must have more authority than a federal agency like USDA has then?
That's a great question. And I had not heard of this board before we started looking into this article. But like you said, it's part of the system that federal employees have. There are steps that you can go through as a federal employee to make sure that you are treated fairly and not let go for no reason, those kinds of things. And that is one of the steps. So they do have the authority to regulate if somebody lost their jobs unjustly and if jobs should be reinstated. So it's not necessarily that they have more authority than the USDA. They have authority in a different area. They have authority over the work, over the employees, and over the work culture more than a person within the USDA. It's one of those checks and balances systems that our government actually tends to be pretty good at. We were talking this morning about the USDA and the Federal Employment Board, whose name I keep forgetting. It is the Merit Systems Protection Board, and they have ruled that the terminations for the USDA were unlawful, and they are insisting that 5,700 USDA employees who were recently fired, that they must be reinstated at least temporarily while this board conducts a 45-day investigation. So some of those employees, the 5,700 USDA employees, they are allowed their jobs back.
So here's another question I have. I'm just throwing this out there. As we pointed out many times, we are not lawyers. We're not experts in all of these different logistical things. We don't eat, live, and breathe this like USDA folks or these merit board folks do. But if the merit board has more authority than USDA to force the agency to hire them back, as you get a little further on in this information, Senator Amy Klobuchar, she has chimed in on this. This is the key quote she has. USDA should immediately comply with this order. She says a lot of other things, and she was concerned about a stop or delay on work on avian flu, wildfires, hospitals, so on and so forth. So she has concerns in all those realms, as she should. But it says USDA should immediately comply with this order. So then that word should indicates to me that they don't have to comply with the order. But yet, when you look on a little bit more, Special Counsel Hampton Dellinger is applauding this stay and saying that federal agencies, I guess there's a should in there as well. So, I guess that reaffirms my point then. So they're using the word should. So then that indicates to me that maybe the merit board does not have authority over USDA for sure.
Yeah, that's one of those words matter things. So should versus must. Interesting thought there, because should implies that there is a choice, whereas must implies that there's not. So you may be right that it's just a recommendation. Should is a recommendation. So
yeah, and I may be getting stuck on something that isn't that important, but those are things that stick out in my mind.
I think, and as we know right now, again, back to my words matter, but It's really easy to pick things apart based on words and what words were used. Having the word should be reinstated in there gives the option then for people who don't want them to be reinstated to say, hey, look, this wasn't mandated. It was just a recommendation. We don't have to follow that recommendation.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
anyway, things to ponder here today, but best of luck to all those employees, and hopefully things will get ironed out and figured out, and this country can move forward with what we're doing. As we've talked about these tariffs so heavily, President Trump is saying that unfortunately there's going to be some rough roads here for a little while. Hopefully it's short-lived, but the end result will be better for the agriculture and better for the farmers as a whole. And he's quoted as saying during his State of the Union, address, that we love the farmers. He loves the farmers. And Rollins also said he cares about the farmers while I saw her at Commodity Classics. So that message is out there, and it's out there pretty heavy. So I want to have faith in that message, and hopefully we'll get through this rough time period as farmers and as consumers ourselves and move on to better and more fair trade deals and a better, more stable economy for everyone, including the ag sector.
Lorrie, I think you're spot on too. And I just my little 2 cents, but I think we just all have to be patient. They want to try to find out everything inside the government from A to Z. And if there's waste, they're going to look into it. So we just all have to be patient and see how
I think
it
it's
all works out.
important, though, to bring out the farmers' voices that are being said nationally so strongly now that, again, back to words matter, especially with the president's post on Truth Social, have fun. A lot of farmers took offense to that nationally.
Yeah, they did.
I think when we say, oh, be patient, it's going to be fine in the long run, we are dismissing the legitimate concerns of farmers around the nation, and we shouldn't do that. So it's very important to, even though, yeah, maybe there's a plan for the long run, but we've heard a lot of this rhetoric before in the first Trump administration where farmers were served a bad hand. And because of that, they had to take government handouts because the trade deals worked against them so strongly. The government had to then pay out to farmers to help them survive. A lot of people weren't happy with that either. So it's really difficult right now to say, be patient. It's all going to work out in the long run because, first off, we don't know that. And there's a lot of rhetoric happening that's starting to really upset some farmers. So we don't want to dismiss their viewpoints either when they are rightfully concerned about their businesses and concerned about what's going on and don't like some of the words that are currently being used to dismiss their concerns.
That's true.
Right. So we've hit on several different topics this morning. We've talked about the Western Ag Processors Association changing and rebranding, and we've talked about a change in the USDA where the employee or the Merit Systems Protection Board wants to reinstate the jobs for the nearly 5,700 USDA employees who were fired and told they were being fired because of performance, which then was reversed. And they said it was actually just what was the word, Lorrie? Restructuring.
Restructuring, yeah.
So those employees should get their jobs back according to this ruling. We'll continue to watch what's going on there. And then a big change here at AgNet West, where I am actually leaving the show, and I have accepted another position, and this will be my last show. Yeah, so a lot of changes going on in the world.
Let me ask you then. So I've come from the sports world. I'm going to be taking over for Miss Sabrina. And I've had in my 20 years of interviewing and doing shows, I got some great interviews from Tom Brady to Josh Allen to I've had these are sport figures, of course. But I'm just thinking both of you, and I know I don't want to put you on the spot, but of all the years you've been working in this great field of agriculture, there's got to be some stories or interviews or things that's touched your heart and everything. Can you throw some great top stories out there, Sabrina, that you've said, wow, I really enjoyed that today?
I've been in news for 35 years, and the last 13 of that have been agriculture news. Before that, it was all hard news. And when it comes to agriculture news, what I find is the stories are all the same. And that's not to make small of any of the stories because the stories are all very important. But farming is very much, we talk about how different the crops are out in California and how different the ag industry is and stuff. But when it comes to the farmers in California are very much like the farmers in New York State and the farmers in Michigan and the farmers in Montana, and they all want to do the best that they can. They want to serve, they want to grow food and fuel for their communities. They want to do what they can for their families. It's a huge industry. It all comes down to the people in it. So I wouldn't say that there's a story that stands out more than another. It's just the idea of the whole industry, I think, has been really interesting. There's a lot of complicated topics within the ag industry and in reporting the ag industry. And what I've learned is that it's really important to be a reporter in it, which means not taking a side, not falling to one side or the other, but to opening my mind to what's possible on all sides and getting that information out there. That's one thing that I have really worked on throughout my entire career, not just in ag reporting, but in my entire career is as a journalist, which I am a journalist. As a journalist, it's my job to get information to people. And it's not my job to put my spin on that information, but it's my job just to make sure that they have the building blocks that they need to make their own opinions. So that's really been my focus, whether it's been agriculture or general news. Now, if you want to talk general news, I have some really fun stories about some of our famous murders from the Central Valley. I covered the Scott Peterson, Lacey Peterson case and the Yosemite murder case. Carrie, what was his name? Carrie, somebody will remember it. Listener, email me and remind me. But I was on that. I remember getting the call from the FBI agent when he called me and said, "Hey, we've got a suspect for these Yosemite tourism murders." And that goes back to the 90s. So I am dating myself, but there will be people out there who remember that. That was a big story. Stainer, Carrie Stainer. I remembered it. So those are the stories that through my career stick out, but mostly just because they were horrible murders. We don't really have that in ag.
Yeah. Now, Lacey Peterson, it's funny you bring that up. So I was living in an apartment and my daughter was hanging out with her kids during the trial time and they were best friends. And I'm like, wow. And then the other one is my old radio partner used to have the restaurant where Scott took Lacey and he actually said, "Table for two, come this way." So he was part of that whole deal. So small world.
Yeah. But as far as covering agriculture, I think the biggest thing to do is to not generalize farmers. And I don't know, just to be able to explain the intricate subjects that we go into. It would take hours to explain California's water situation. And the challenge has always been to be able to, especially for our format, Nick, where, we have this hour-long program, but we also do these 1-minute short news blurbs. And the challenge is taking a complicated issue like that and turning it into 60 seconds. So that's always been a fun challenge too. And I like that because it really makes you sharpen your skills. Lorrie, wouldn't you say that, and speaking of time, we only have a minute left in this segment, but wouldn't you say that taking a complicated issue and breaking it down into 60 seconds really sharpens your skills?
Absolutely. I cannot agree with you more. And it takes a lot of experience and practice, actually, I think, to get that.
Yeah, it does. It really does. And it's hard work to be able to do it. Especially, I started out in newspapers and you wrote by how much space you were going to take up and how many words, but you get a lot of them. You get a lot of space. You can fit a lot into 1,000 words. And 1,000 words, that's about 4 minutes in radio time. Maybe even more, 5 minutes in radio time, considering how slowly I speak now. So yeah, to break that down, to break a whole story down and put it into 60 seconds, that's where the real challenge lies.
I could not agree with you more.
We were just chatting that this is actually my last show with the AgNet News Hour. I may come back from time to time as a guest host if Lorrie will have me. Lorrie is taking over the helm as the lead on the show. She will be the head host for the AgNet News Hour. And so, Lorrie, as I am officially handing the show over to you, I'd like to ask you some questions too. You guys asked me questions last time, but so for you, Lorrie, you were the 2023 Farm Broadcaster of the Year. You have been the past president of the National Association of Farm Broadcasting. You have been in this industry for a couple of decades. I know it's been at least 25 years, maybe more. I don't remember.
Going on
I
my
don't
28th.
28th years, yes. So, what are some things that you like best about farm broadcasting?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I love this industry. I grew up in this industry myself, a little bit different than you and Nick, but grew up in this industry, have had a passion. I knew even in high school that I wanted to stay in this industry. I have such an appreciation that the farmers are just so innovative, and the things that this industry does with what we have, not only land, but also money, it just amazes me all the time. I think I learn something new every single day. I never get bored. I have truly enjoyed the conversations I've had with not only farmers, but with the leaders. And yes, some of the leaders have a farming background, but some of them don't and have learned it along the way. So that has been a lot of fun. I've had some really cool experiences. I've done my shows from tractors, from an airplane, gotten to do some travel. So overall, it's just been a really great industry. And I think bottom line is when I'm done with the day, it fills my cup. Even when these are hard topics, it fills my cup at the end of the day.
Yeah. So, Nick, I'm going to tell you something about Lori that I don't know if everybody knows, but she was a rodeo queen.
Wow. That's huge.
Tell us about that, Lori.
Yeah, make sure we get that point in there.
I'm sorry, I did mean to embarrass you just a little.
No, it's all right.
She
Well,
was a
that's great.
rodeo queen. Yep. So I'm going to be the new CEO of the North Dakota News Cooperative. And this, you were talking about, it fills your cup. So they have a mission that really fills my cup. And they have a kind of a two-part mission. One of the first part of the mission is North Dakota, obviously not a very populated state, and it doesn't have a lot of the resources that California has as far as news goes. We'll be helping small rural newspapers around the state and some rural radio stations around the state with their news coverage. And that's the primary thing, is focusing on state issues and providing news coverage that a lot of these small rural newspapers and stations just don't have the resources to do. But then the other half of our mission is news literacy. And that is something that I'm extremely passionate about, because we're losing news literacy around our nation. And not just as news consumers, but also as news providers. There's a lot of news providers that are blurring that line a lot between what is news and what is commentary. And it makes it harder for people watching to be able to distinguish between news and commentary. And so that is part of the mission, is to help with news literacy, which helps people understand, where their news comes from, how actual news is created, and also to distinguish between factual news and fake news, which has become increasingly important, especially with all the stuff that's out there on the internet. And I fully blame social media for this, with how easy it is to spread misinformation, and people buy it. You trust it because maybe it came from a close friend online that spread something without knowing it was fake. Or maybe it came from your mom, or maybe it came from your kid, and they shared something that they didn't realize was fake, but you trust them, so you trust that information is true. And news, kind of helping the community with understanding things like that, to be able to do their own research, or to know if a news agency is legitimate. Those are things that fills my cup, because I see this growing need for it. And again, I 100% blame social media. I think social media is our current downfall. And that
Well,
is my opinion. Again, send your
you're
hateful
absolutely
emails to
right.
Sabrina.
Fake news is, yeah, and everyone believes it. But my goal is, once I get my feet wet and I start doing shows, I want to give the grower the voice out there, because I have a tremendous relationships with California, Arizona growers. So I've worked with, from irrigation monitoring under below the earth with the soil, to ag, to water pumps, to drip systems, to fruit trees, to everything, all the way to the end user in the grocery chains. So I want to bring the news to the world of what they're thinking about. So I want to give their voice to the big wigs that are actually living day to day in the ag industry and the food industry.
We are in our last segment of the show, and this is my last show as host. I am turning the hosting duties over to Lorrie Boyer. You will be in very good hands with her. Again, she was the 2023 Farm Broadcaster of the Year, past president of the National Association of Farm Broadcastings. She has a list of awards and accolades that would embarrass her if I were to go over it, and it would take up the last 5 minutes we have. But very happy to be doing that. We also have newcomer Nick Papagni, and he has done some sports broadcasting in the past and has done some things in the ag industry, but new to farm broadcasting. So he will be coming in as kind of a co-host on the show and doing some of our shorter broadcasts. Yeah. So as we wrap it up here today, we only have about another 5 minutes, but Lorrie, it's been a great pleasure hosting the show with you. Of course, now our listeners who have been listening to us for a while know that Lorrie and I go way back. She was in my wedding. We're good friends. So we have a long history, but doing the show together the last few months, I think, has just been extremely rewarding and actually the highlight of my farm broadcasting career. It's been the best few months.
Oh, that's nice of you to say. For me as
Yeah.
well. We're going to miss you very much. I'm sure, Nick's going to step right in there and get after it and get on all these ag issues. But
There's a lot.
it's been a lot of fun. I like the diversity that we have brought to the table and that we've talked about.
Yeah, I do too. And it's nice to have the different viewpoints because what I like is that we are able to pick out different key points and stories, Lorrie, so that something I notice or something I don't notice, you'll pick up and notice right away. And so that kind of, I don't know, working with each other, complementing each other, that has been really good, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we've had some fun. We've teased and had a little bit of fun on here. We've also talked about some hard issues, talked about rural mental health, and just some of these issues are just hard because we know our farmers are suffering and we know our farmers are doing the best they can to provide food, feed, fuel, and clothing for this world, but are up against so many challenges all the time. Sometimes it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah, I agree. And those are topics that absolutely need to be covered in depth and they need to be talked about, but they are hard to talk about. And if you're going to do a good job of farm broadcasting, which I feel like we have, you have to talk about the harder things. You have to talk about the darker side. This is not an industry where everything is rainbows and bubbles and balloons. This is an industry with a lot of difficulties, and it's really important to be able to speak freely and accurately about those difficulties. And so I've been really proud of the stuff that we've been able to cover and to talk about on that end.
Yeah, my philosophy is think like your listening audience. In our case, of course, it's the ag audience that we are directing our conversation to, but also trying to offer the educational piece for maybe those that aren't so involved in ag, or maybe they're removed out of the ag industry, but still follow, because I know there's a lot of those people. I run into those people all the time. They don't necessarily eat, live, and breathe it, but they do because they eat, live, and breathe, right? So
Right.
I take that back. But you know what I mean? They don't directly work in it, but they still follow. They still have it on in the backgrounds. They still want to know what's going on. So anyway, the point of that is that think like they do. What would a farmer want to know? What kinds of questions would they ask? Sometimes the farmer asks me a question and I'll think, oh, that's a good question. Next time I visit with so-and-so, I'll bring that up. And I do. So yeah.
Yeah. And that's always good too. And Nick, that's something that you'll pick up on really quickly too, because I know that you do enjoy doing the interviews and things, but to listen to what the farmers are saying, not just what, obviously, as I just said, don't believe what on the social media, but when you talk with them individually and get into not the surface level, but the harder issues and really hear what they're saying and then ask other people about that. I think that's the biggest thing. And that was something that that really was true to light in the poultry stories that we were doing about the Wisconsin and other poultry, when the poultry co-op basically went bankrupt and completely abandoned their farmers. And it was really interesting to hear from those individual farmers who were really affected and to go in deep on those stories, which Brian Winnikins, another farm broadcaster and good friend of ours, he did a lot of those interviews, and hearing his interviews, and we ran them on the show, and hearing how they were talking about what they were going through. That's the reporting that's important. When you can talk with somebody in their darkest hour and be honest and open about what they're going through, and you can get that information out to the world, I will always say that's the important information to go to.
So true. One thing I do know, what I loved is I'm in a group with I call it coffee shop talk, and there's about 10 to 15 farmers. We show up every morning and they just sit around and talk good, bad, and ugly. And it's always fun to listen and pick their brain for ideas and what they have to go through every day, because they all share stories with each other. And I love that. So I'm going to bring that to
Yeah.
the table as well.
Yeah. Those are important conversations. It's good that you're there in those. And speaking of important conversations, it's important that it's time for our conversation to wrap up. So, signing off from the AgNet News Hour for the final time, at least as host. Yeah, thank you guys for having me. It's been a great pleasure for the last 13 years.
Best of luck. Best of luck in
Best
your
of luck,
future
Sabrina.
endeavors.
Thank you both. All right, this has been the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson here with Lorrie Boyer and Nick Papagni. Have a wonderful weekend.
To get more information on the topics you heard today, visit AgNet West at agnetwest.com. You can also stay connected by following us on our social media at AgNet West on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Also look for Sabrina Halvorson on Facebook, and be sure to subscribe to our podcast by searching for AgNet West on your podcast app. Thank you for listening to the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. AgNet West Radio Network, your primary choice for agriculture news.